The eviction notice was taped to my door with cheap curling tape that flapped softly in the cold wind of a late November afternoon. It was bright red, impossible to ignore, and it screamed the truth I had been trying to outrun for weeks. 7 days. That's all the time I had left before the place I called home in Columbus, Ohio, would no longer belong to me. I stood there in the quiet hallway of the aging apartment building, staring at the paper like it might somehow disappear if I blinked long enough. My hands trembled as I pulled it off the door. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of every mistake I had made in the past year. My name is Nathan Carter, and until a few months earlier I had a steady job at a small printing company on the west side of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of stability. But when the company unexpectedly shut down after the owner suffered a stroke, everything collapsed almost overnight. Savings vanished faster than I ever imagined possible. Job interviews turned into polite rejection emails. And bills kept coming no matter how many times I refreshed my inbox hoping for good news. Soon the rent I owed stacked up like bricks on my chest, and now that stack had turned into a single red eviction notice. If you believe that kindness and second chances still exist in this world, please take a moment right now to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can completely change a life. Inside my apartment, the silence felt louder than usual. The heater hummed weakly, barely fighting the cold creeping through the thin windows. The place was small, one bedroom, faded carpet, and a kitchen that smelled permanently like burnt toast. But it had been my safe place for 3 years. Now it felt like a countdown clock. Every morning I woke up earlier than the day before, hoping to beat the anxiety that seemed to arrive with the sunrise. I applied to every job I could find. Grocery stores, warehouses, delivery services, construction crews. Some interviews went well, others ended before they really began. But none of them came with the words I desperately needed to hear, "You're hired." The worst part wasn't the fear of losing the apartment, it was the quiet shame that followed me everywhere. When neighbors passed in the hallway, I wondered if they had seen the notice on my door. I imagined them whispering about the guy who couldn't even pay his rent. By day 4, I had started packing, not because I wanted to accept defeat, but because deep down I knew hope was running out. That afternoon, while I was folding the last of my clothes into an old cardboard box, there was a knock at the door. It was soft, almost hesitant. When I opened it, I found Margaret Whitaker standing in the hallway. Margaret was my landlady. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair always tied neatly into a bun, and the kind of calm eyes that made people feel like they were being carefully observed without being judged. She owned the entire building, though she only visited occasionally to check on things. I immediately felt my stomach twist. I assumed she had come to remind me of the eviction. Her eyes moved briefly past me into the half-packed apartment. She noticed the boxes, the bare shelves, and the exhaustion written across my face. She stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind her. The air felt heavy with something unspoken. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then she looked directly at me and said something I never expected. She told me she knew about the eviction notice. Of course she did. She was the one who approved it through the property management office. But then she explained that she had only just returned from visiting her sister in Oregon and had gone through the building's paperwork that morning. And what she saw didn't sit right with her. She asked me to tell her what happened. At first I hesitated. Pride can be a stubborn thing even when you have nothing left. But something about the way she stood there, patient, calm, and genuinely curious, made the words spill out before I could stop them. I told her about the printing company shutting down, about the endless job applications, about the sleepless nights and the mounting bills, about the quiet panic of realizing that life could fall apart faster than anyone ever prepares you for. When I finished, the room fell silent again. Margaret slowly nodded as if she had been expecting every word. Then she made an offer that changed everything. But it wasn't money. It wasn't a rent extension either. Instead, she told me something about herself I had never known. Before buying the apartment building years ago, Margaret had run a small community nonprofit that helped struggling families get back on their feet. She had spent decades working with people who had fallen on hard times, people who needed not just financial help, but direction. And recently, she had been thinking about starting something again. A new community resource center right here in Columbus, a place where people could come for job training, financial guidance, and support during difficult transitions. But she couldn't do it alone. Then she looked straight at me and made the offer. She told me she would cancel the eviction notice and let me stay in the apartment rent-free for 3 months. In exchange, she wanted me to help her build the new center from the ground up. At first I thought she was joking. Me? Help start a nonprofit? I barely felt capable of fixing my own life, let alone helping others. But Margaret simply smiled in that calm way of hers and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes the best people to help those who are struggling are the ones who know exactly what struggle feels like. The next few weeks felt like stepping into an entirely different life. Instead of waking up to panic, I woke up with purpose. Margaret and I spent long days transforming an empty storefront she owned into what would become the Whitaker Community Support Center. We cleaned, painted walls, assembled donated furniture, and contacted local businesses willing to offer training opportunities. Slowly, something incredible began to happen. People started showing up. A single mother who needed help writing a resume. A factory worker who had been laid off after 20 years. A teenager looking for advice about trade school. Every story reminded me of where I had been just weeks earlier, and every time someone walked out with renewed hope, something inside me started healing too. Then one afternoon, about 2 months after Margaret's offer, something unexpected happened. One of the local business owners who had partnered with our center, Harold Benson, who ran a regional printing supply company, stopped by to drop off donated office equipment. While helping unload boxes, we started talking. I told him about my experience at the old printing company. His eyes lit up immediately. He explained that his company had recently expanded and they were actually looking for someone with exactly that kind of background. 2 days later, I walked into his office for an interview, and for the first time in months, I walked out with a job offer, a real job, stable hours, full benefits. I remember sitting in my car afterward with the offer letter in my hands, staring at the words like they might vanish. 7 days away from eviction had turned into the beginning of an entirely new chapter. The community center continued to grow even after I started working full-time. Margaret eventually hired a small team, but I still volunteered there every weekend, because that place had become more than a project. It had become proof that kindness can ripple outward in ways no one expects. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask you something special. Please take a moment to comment below and share where you're watching from and one act of kindness you've witnessed in your life. Your story might inspire someone who desperately needs hope today. 3 years later, the Whitaker Community Support Center has helped more than 2,000 people find jobs, housing, and stability. But the part that still amazes me most is how it all started, with one woman who refused to see a struggling tenant as a problem to remove, and instead saw him as a person worth believing in. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who might need a reminder that life can change in unexpected ways, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes, the moment that feels like the end of everything is actually the quiet beginning of something better.